Wahid. Good morning, both of you. Thank you so much for joining us, Mbak Rini dan Mbak Alissa. Hi.
Yeah, good morning, Mbak Caroline and Mas Paul, yeah?
All right, good morning. First of all, let's go to Mbak Rini first. What do you think of the 20-year punishment or imprisonment that had been handed out for, is that a proper sentence for a sexual offender? And what is your opinion on additional punishments? There has been discussions and perhaps controversy over additional punishments such as chemical castrations.
Yeah, first of all, on behalf of Komnas Perempuan, I would like to express my deep concern and full support for the victims and their families in fighting for justice
Yeah.
and recovery. On the issue of 20 years sentence, if we look at the length of time and number of victims from 2016, 12 female students who are still underage, it seems a 20-year sentence is not enough. But the number perhaps coming from the maximum sentence for rape, as you know that maximum sentence for rape regulated by the KUHP, the Criminal Code of Indonesia, is 12 years. And since the students still underage,
Yeah.
so it's aided 1/3 actually, according to the child protection law, yeah. Because since the perpetrator is religious teacher who's supposed to protect child and he's not. In another side, this punishment actually show the weak legal regulation related to rape in Indonesia. You know that the severity of the evidence that requires witnesses. I cannot imagine actually there should be a witness during the rape, and also lack of evidence of rape because the victim accidentally omitted the evidence because maybe the victims are very panicked and also very traumatized.
Trauma, yeah.
And she directly take a shower. And also the lack of capacity of officer sometimes only focus to our criminal code or lack of victim perspective.
Right.
Regarding the chemical castration, Komnas Perempuan understand that the additional punishment based on the concern toward the increased significant number of sexual violence, yeah, particularly rape against children. However, Komnas Perempuan views that this additional punishment is problematic because in one side reduce the power of state in fulfilling constitutional rights. In the other side, chemical castration diverts attention from the latent and chronic problems that exist in efforts to eliminate sexual violence, including against children. In situations where case handling is still very limited, the chemical castration will not substantively address the problem of access to justice faced by the victims. That's my opinion on the two questions
Yeah.
emerged.
Very good points there, Barini, as well, because, on one hand, it feels like we're trying to get justice in
Yeah.
any way possible, and we can max out any punishments and add on any punishments as possible.
Right.
But really, we're not solving the root of the problem here.
Correct. And this is such a
Right.
case that has appeared that we wish we will never had happen.
Goodness, no.
And it does happen in our nation. And you were speaking, Ibu Rini, about the victims themselves. What is it possibly that we can do, and can we apply the restorative justice for the victims regarding this case?
So we have to actually back to the definition of restorative justice first, yeah?
Yeah.
Restorative justice is a process whereby all the parties with a stake in particular offense come together to resolve collectively how to deal with the aftermath of the offense and its implication for the future. We have to take into our consideration the future of the 12 female students.
Yes.
And also the possibility that the perpetrator can be restored, actually. So we have to follow the mechanism first because we rely on the law follow the process of the legal process, and take an example of Valencia case, for example, yeah. They go to the legal process first, and then if there is a possibility to drop the case, then the law enforcement institution can discuss how to stop the process. So it's not like a practice taken by the police, for example. They stop the process since the beginning during the investigation, and also they don't even consider the trauma and also psychological issue happen towards the victims. This is something that we don't want to have
Of course.
restorative justice. But restorative justice need to follow the legal process first, and then discuss about all the things, come together to resolve collectively, and then the institutional law enforcement institution can take position to stop the process. But I don't think on this case restorative justice is necessary, because it's already clear, yeah, there is a rape toward 12 female students, and also the perpetrator is a teacher, religious teacher, who's supposed to protect our child, and he's not. So this is something that we have to take into our consideration. Do not use restorative justice for this case.
Right. What about the compensation for the victims? We have heard that there is compensation that will be provided for victims. What is their commission stance on that?
If we look at the the law, government regulation, actually, number 7 of 2018 on the provision of compensation, restitution, and assistance to victim witnesses, it is possible for the victims to get compensation through restitution, for example, in which that students, female students, and their families can claim some of fund from the state, actually coming from the perpetrator, but managed by the state, and also get assistance to victim witnesses done by LPSK. LPSK is one institution, state witness and victim protection agency, who has a mandate to protect the victims or the witness. Compensation can also claim after the verdict, after the case has been verdict by the judge. So this is something that's possible to claimed by the victim and their family.
But it's just not enough, right? This is just not enough. You know,
I mean,
fundings, and this is, it doesn't even counter.
Oh yeah,
you know,
if
the
anything,
trauma.
let's just talk about compensation in order to cover perhaps psychological visits they might have to have, loss of work perhaps.
And they become young mothers because of this perpetrator and this person. No, you know, that's why it's good that we're going to touch this base, because we want to go ahead to Alissa right now. The victims, they're underage first. They're underage, and they trusted their teacher, you know, and some of them become young mothers. Now, Alissa, what are the psychological assistance that needs to be provided for the victims, not only by a professional, but what can we do as the people and the community, you know, to safeguard them and to make sure they have a good future lie ahead for them?
Thank you, Caroline. Of course, it will need a whole and comprehensive action by so many people to help the victims to adjust to their new life, because they have been living in a state of dysfunction. They have been living in fear. They have been living in learned helplessness. And to help them get over all this I would say this is a huge disaster for them personally. We need to help them to acquire new skills. So not only about giving them sympathy or empathy,
Right.
but also helping them to get new skills, life skills. For example, how to manage their emotions, how to manage themselves, how to redesign their lives, how to make decisions for themselves, and of course, how to deal with the social pressure on them. Because before they were behind a closed door,
Yeah.
now they're open in public, and that would also need another adjustment that they need to get. And this is our all should be done with care, of course. This is not only about the therapy itself, but also the support from the public, from the family. So of course, the one going into therapy, not only the victims, but also the family, the immediate family that would be their safe space for the nearest future, at least until they get back on their feet.
Correct. I mean, I do agree with Alissa right here, especially this is not a switch on, switch off lights, that you can just forget about everything in the past trauma. It will stick to them, but they need to focus on something that is brighter, something they think that, this is what my life is supposed to be, a future, a bright future they should have.
Yes.
Especially these are young kids where their future still lies ahead.
All right, and on that topic as well, Alissa, Paul here, there have been many cases of reported sexual violence taking place in Islamic boarding schools. In fact, this has been actually tracked via data from the Indonesian Commission for Violence Against Women in the past 5 years alone. This is a very concerning to me and us as parents because when you go to send your kid to boarding school, when we send them to regular school, even pre-pandemic, your teachers are probably the first adults that you trust your kids with outside of your
They're the
immediate
second
family.
parents.
Exactly. The second parents, the first adults that you trust for the very first time outside of your own home. Now, in a boarding school, it takes it to a next level because they're not only out of the house for the morning, but you're actually entrusting them for the entire time of their stay there. So what is the ideal age for us to consider even sending our kids to boarding schools? Because there are a lot of advantages to boarding schools. But now that there's this kind of risk that we have to think about as well, how do we consider what age we should start thinking about sending our kids, if we want to do so, to boarding school?
It's actually a very individual decision and context, because I've known children from age 6 going into boarding schools that they thrive on the boarding schools itself. But the challenge is this, Mas Paulo, how to pick the right boarding schools. Because if you want to send your children as early as 6 years old, this is the age getting into elementary school, right? So if you want to send your kid at 7, you need to make sure that the boarding school that you pick is the big boarding school that has special education for these young children, the elementary school children. But as a family psychologist, I would say the ideal age would be the junior high school. So it's about 12 years old, because by that time, actually, the moral development process is already established to prepare the young children to know about themselves, and also to have an idea of what is wrong and what is right, what is appropriate and what is inappropriate. That's from the like Kohlberg theory of moral foundation. That would be the right age.
Right. And plus their communication skills would be much better at that age as well. They're able to communicate anything that you ask of them, right?
Yes.
Correct.
And also, when we're talking about this, it's, the predator, Heri Wirawan himself, was found not to have a proper license to open his school. I mean, this is also the responsibility of parents, I think. You want to
Your
put
background check.
Yes, exactly. Like, you want your kids, you're putting your kids to school. It means that you want a greater future, a better life life for them, right? But then you have to do the work also by, checking the background, finding the license and whatnot. Is this, what is the safe boarding school? I mean, how can we say, okay, I think this platform, this educational sector is safe for my kids? And from which background can we see? And what kind of the lists that parents should do before we entrusted our children, or the checklist before we put our children to that school, or especially a boarding school where our children most of the time are there rather than at home with us?
All the time, not most of the time.
Correct.
Yeah, pretty much.
That's 24 hours, 7 days a week. Just a few times visitations and communications. So, Mbak Caroline and Mas Paul, we have 32,000 Islamic boarding schools listed. 32,000. We have around 5 million children living in these boarding schools. That's only the licensed one, the one on the list from Ministry of Religious Affairs. The one like Heri Wirawan's boarding school is not part of that 32,000.
Wow.
The 32,000 boarding schools. So this is a challenge because boarding schools are Islamic boarding schools or religious-based boarding schools. They are real non-governmental organizations, right? So sometimes it's hard for the government to, for example, to what do you call it? To sweep the practices of these Islamic boarding schools, because the registration is actually voluntary. So it goes back to the parents.
Correct.
To pick the right boarding school. So what are the criteria? First, please check the affiliation of the boarding schools. Like for example, we know that in Indonesia we have Nahdlatul Ulama and Muhammadiyah were very big and organized. So if the boarding schools are affiliated with these two organizations or other smaller but known popular organizations, it would be better.
Yeah.
The second one is actually background check on the facilities and of course the procedure within the boarding schools themselves, because usually they have these SOPs in place, right? Like for example, is there a counseling center? Is there a mechanism for children to go up to whenever they feel that something is not right? If they're sick. And the third one is actually getting the testimonies from the previous alumni of that the boarding schools that we are considering. Those are the three most important considerations.
Because they become concrete.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, there's nothing like some anecdotes from somebody who's actually been there. That I think on a personal level, that would be the one I would refer to the most as well. Right?
Yeah. And but Alissa also, I mean, and Paul, and also Marini that's here joining with us. We've seen that this kind of cases that happen within children. Sometimes, especially when they're younger or below age, they don't report, sexual violence that they experience. One, because they're children. Sometimes, even as parents or as an adult, we kind of tend to think, are you sure? Is this just happening in your imagination or this is happening in real life, right? Sometimes the words of a children are not, as oppressive as an adult, right? If it's an adult, then we know that's what happened and that is real. How can a parent, especially a parent, really teach our children about, the sex and their rights? And since how young should we teach them? Because sometimes right here in the Eastern countries, it seems it's still very taboo, Alissa and Marini, but what do you think? Like seeing all these cases that is happening with underage children, underage female, when should we really teach them how to, protect yourself?
The actually, this is not only a challenge in the Islamic boarding schools or boarding schools. Yes, we have problems with, we have challenges within boarding schools, but the sexual violence are also happening in the homes, right? Like, for example, close families or even caregivers. So it has to be started early. It has to start early for parents to educate, to prepare their children to know what is appropriate and what is not appropriate in terms of the sexuality, their sexuality. Like, for example, at the age of 3, children should be taught there are private parts that
Yes.
should not be touched by others except their parents and their caregivers.
Yeah.
And that is only for helping them.
Yes.
Like, for example, helping them in the bathroom or helping them get dressed or if they're sick.
Correct.
So that is something that we should already prepare our children. So these are the areas, like, for example, for girls, we can introduce below the neck
Shoulders.
to the mid, what do you call it? The
Ankles?
no, just below your pelvic area.
Oh, okay.
That's private.
Right.
No one should touch that.
Right.
For boys, it's under the navel to the knees.
Okay.
That's private. That should not be touched by others, especially if they don't want to.
Right.
And then the second one is to give them confidence enough to tell
Yes.
adults that they believe.
Correct.
This is really important. So getting them to learn that there are challenges and they
Yes.
are welcome. They are welcome to talk to others that they trust whenever they feel that there is something that they need to talk about.
Yeah.
Like they can talk to their older siblings
Right.
if they cannot talk to their parents,
Yeah.
or they can talk to uncles or
Right.
aunties that they can trust. Those two we can start at as early as 3 years old, actually.
Actually, we did this for my daughter, who is the
Yeah.
older of the kids, and at around 3 years old, we've already done those exact same things, and continue. And if I can may add one thing, Alissa, is that ask questions all the time.
Yeah.
Like, don't take it for granted that they'll just talk to you about
Yeah.
something, because they might not know if something is
Yeah,
wrong or
right,
something is
yeah.
uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So her mother asks questions all the time, a lot more than me.
Yeah.
Like, how was it when you went to play in so-and-so's
Right.
house? Did anyone say
Yeah.
anything to you? What was being
Yeah.
said? What would you guys do when you guys went to your rooms? You know, like, it's just a lot of questions, because if there are any red flags that come up in the answers, then you can explore more.
And
If
not-
not, it was just a question and answer. kind
Right,
of
and it's
session.
not only girls, because I do have 2 boys, right? Alissa and Barini, and since the age of 3 and 4, and they do have a caregiver, and we already said, that's your aurat,
Sure.
your private parts,
Yeah.
that should not be seen. It's only you and your mom and your dad, and
Right.
we have been doing that until now. They know when they have to change or when not, even though
Sure.
they have a caregiver,
Yeah.
they can't show their private parts because that's their part,
Yeah.
and it's only the parents that can, see it, or they ask help to their parents.
Kids
so
are smart.
start them from the very beginning
Yeah.
for them to appreciate and to know what's
Yes.
their private parts, and that's for their safe haven, their
All right.
safeguard.
I have one last question for Barini, actually. Let's talk a little bit of black and white and hard lines here. When it comes to the law, what are some of the weaknesses of the existing laws that possibly basically need the force a little bit of ratifications, to the sexual elimination bill, in your opinion?
Yeah, if you look at our regulation, criminal procedure code, our KUHP,
Yeah.
it's still narrow in defining rape. That's the most important notes for our KUHP. According to KUHP, rape is defined as sexual intercourse in which there is penetration of penis into the vagina with violence or threats of violence. Narrow definition of rape has made non-penile penetration rape unreachable by law. Consequently, victims cannot claim the right to justice through the criminal justice system. And the other side also, rape is sometimes categorized as a crime of decency. So it is often associated with morality. So that's why if we are talking about sexuality and body in our what we call sexual education, sometimes we get a stigma and misconception.
Correct.
And this misconception also coming from our regulation. And from the Criminal Procedure Code, this is KUHAP, Law Number 8 of 1981, focus mostly on the rights of the suspect or defendant for the entire process of investigation, prosecution, and court examination. It doesn't guarantee the protection of the right of witness and victims. This is something that we need to revise, particularly both for KUHP and KUHAP. And in our opinion as well, KUHAP is also not yet in line with the principle of CEDAW General Recommendation. CEDAW is the Convention on the Elimination of Anti-Discrimination Against Women. The General Recommendation number 33 on access to justice for women actually mandate to also put principle of CEDAW into our all the what we call recovery system. And because in general, actually victims do not get psychological, social, and economic recovery. This is something that also need taken into our consideration when we talk about our anti-sexual violence bill. Yeah, we really encourage all the what we call stakeholders, particularly the DPR, our parliament, to really take into the serious attention on the issue of recovery system.
Yeah.
In Indonesia, we still have a problem on rehabilitate the victim. For example, the implementation of various regulation must also be supported by the integration of victims' rights for health, psychological, social rehabilitation, and economic empowerment services, manage and become the duties, principle, and function of the relevant ministries and institutions. Therefore, Komnas Perempuan actually really urge the ministries, institution, government to work together, not sectoral anymore. The integration of the integrated criminal justice system with the victim recovery service system need also to be taken into the consideration.
Yeah.
That's why Komnas Perempuan actually since 2000 has already established what we call SPPT-PKKTP, the Integrated Criminal Justice System for handling cases for violence against women. Because this is, in our opinion, can be a breakthrough in the state response to the handling of rape cases, for example. So, in my opinion, also, state have full responsibility to provide the recovery system, the integrated recovery system, along with the legal process.
All right, that's actually something that we hope happens sooner rather than later. Barini, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate your insight into this matter. And thank you
You're
as well,
welcome.
Alissa, for joining us and giving us your perspective. We hope that you both stay healthy and take good care. We'll talk to you again.